It's actually Easter week today, so I'm even more happy that more and more people are joining this call, this online webinar. And for those of you who do not know me yet, my name is Josepha. I'm the head of growth and ecosystem at ClimateChoice and also your host for today's session. And if you wonder what ClimateChoice is all about, if you haven't heard of us before, well, we work particularly with procurement, sustainability, and business teams on one core challenge, namely decoding Scope 3 from a very abstract reporting topic into business relevant information. And we do so by crawling, harmonizing, and then also validating supplier specific data so that all of you can work together having comparable and audit ready data sets for procurement decision support, but also scalable Scope 3 action. And that's exactly also what today is all about. Because if you look around, you see really that the ecosystem is also maturing. So many companies, right, if you ask them, they already have a first transparency, they know where their major hotspots are, they have targets. But what is then oftentimes missing is answering the question of how do you now translate carbon data into decisions? And this is exactly where carbon pricing actually comes in and why we want to dedicate the upcoming hour here together to find out how businesses can actually use carbon pricing to make emissions become, let's call it, a market signal actually for decision making. And if you look at the title of today, well, we chose it very intentionally because carbon pricing shall really not be about adding another metric. It's about changing how decisions are made. And as we will see throughout this webinar today, it's actually an underlying shift that we are accompanying basically by carbon pricing. And that is that carbon moves from being an externality to having a price tag. And this then also enables that carbon actually moves from a reporting requirement to a sourcing criteria. And to discover all of this scenery, I'm of course not alone because I'm not an expert at it, but I have two very interesting experts with me today. And this is why I quickly want to also introduce them to you and why their perspectives matter right now. Now, our first speaker actually represents a global community of procurement professionals, all working towards one goal, namely making sustainable procurement the default. And I'm very sure that a lot of you already know this community, of course, but our speaker is actually leading the carbon pricing for procurement initiative within this initiative, bringing companies together to move carbon pricing from isolated pilots into something that can actually scale. And as we will also see today, her work is really all about one question, namely, how do we turn individual ambition into shared practice? Because she says that to succeed with decarbonization, you do not need to do it alone. And with that, a very warm welcome, Kathrin Decker, Deputy Director at the Sustainable Procurement Pledge, to at least our virtual stage today. Hi, Kathrin.
Thank you very much, Josepha, for the very nice introduction. I'm very pleased to be here today and to represent the SPP and the great results of the collaboration, 2 years of collaboration of procurement and sustainability professionals in our initiative around carbon pricing. Thank you very much
Yeah.
for having me.
No, I'm very so much looking forward to actually having you today with us here. And you now mentioned 2 years, right? Since you kicked off this work, but it's 7 days since the end of World Sustainable Procurement Day. How are you
Yes.
doing today?
I'm doing very well. I recovered from this 25-hour marathon because, we started with 24 hours. We can't get enough. We added the opening and closing, so 25 hours now. It was again a great run through the topics around sustainable procurement that procurement professionals should look into, learn from each other, and really translate it into action in their own organization. So, it was again a fantastic day.
Yeah, amazing. And you will be sharing more about the resources then also at the end of the session. But for everybody who's now wondering, you can, of course, also do some research on it already, World Sustainable Procurement Day. And I think in some days you will also have all the sessions online, right?
Next week, we worked hard on getting everything up and running. Next week, you can see all the session recordings on our YouTube channel.
Yeah, yeah, and I would really, I would have a look at it. So I looked at some from last year, and very good speakers, very good topics, and you're also going along with the yeah, increasing maturity of the company. So topics are getting more targeted, more detailed, and yeah, I think there's quite something for everybody.
Absolutely. And we really tried this year to make it very practical. So, with our hashtag action over noise in this world we're living in, I think that was really our battle cry. We really wanted to make those sessions really as practical and useful for procurement professionals. So, yeah, I invite everyone to look into the sessions, multiple topics, from people to planet to what's up in the profession of procurement. So, yes, enjoy.
Yeah, nice. And I mean, talking about the perspective of procurement, we actually have a second speaker with us today, and he brings this directly into the reality of a global life science organization. And in that organization, he works right at the intersection of sustainability and procurement, where he's driving Scope 3 initiatives together with the procurement leadership team, but then also really influencing real business decisions. And this also means that the second speaker brings in two very interesting sides, I find. On the one hand side, the ambition and the benefits, right, of what carbon pricing is about, what it's for, but then also the complexity of making it work in practice. Because sometimes, yeah, perfect is the enemy of good, as he says. He's also an advocate of think big, start small, scale fast. And with that, a very warm welcome to Jaymin, Sustainability and Risk Manager at Bayer AG. Hi, Jaymin. How are you?
Hey, Josepha. Hey, Kathrin. Really great to be here. Thank you. Thank you for giving the opportunity to speak here. I think looks already a great group coming together. So really excited about it.
Yeah, nice. Thank you. And before we actually dive into the topic that everybody is then also looking for, I'd actually love to just do a mini round of hellos between the speakers of perspective sharing, starting with the foundations. Because, Kathrin, I mean, through the SPP carbon pricing initiative, you've been working with, yeah, many different companies on what I would call then also translate the company insights and experiences into shared principles and guidelines. So to just also get an understanding and kick us off, what problem are you actually trying to solve with the carbon pricing principles?
Maybe let me zoom out a bit into explaining how this whole topic came actually to SPP, because I think that explains also nicely how SPP is working. So SPP, a global community of over 20,000 procurement professionals, really there to share the knowledge. It all started actually with Bayer and Haleon coming to SPP saying, look, we have this topic of carbon pricing. We believe this has a potential actually to accelerate decarbonization, but only if we can, not everyone is doing their own thing in their own organization, but actually harmonize, find a common approach to it, because we believe that could really accelerate carbon pricing. And what they were looking for were actually a neutral place to have those conversations, to bring procurement people across industries, across sectors, even competitors into one room, a neutral space to have these conversations. And this is where SPP actually opened up this space called Initiative. And the carbon pricing was one of is our first initiative in our pilot. So the idea was really how can we translate a topic like carbon actually into the language of procurement to really embed it into the decision making, and what needs to be in place? What are the approaches? What are the technicalities? But also, what does it mean in terms of engaging internally in your organization, engaging with your suppliers, to really bring together, and that was in 2024, all the knowledge that is already out there, because carbon pricing wasn't a big topic on the agenda yet, but everyone was already starting to look into this and saw it as one of a tool in the decarbonization toolbox. So they all came together to exchange what is actually going on and to really bring this together into a first draft of the carbon pricing principles. And the mood in the room was really like, let's not get it perfect, but really let's get it started. And so that not everyone has to start from the beginning and start to reinvent the wheel, but actually can build up on the knowledge that is already out there and the and practical procurement experiences that are already out there. So yeah, this is really how it started. As I said, it now really developed within 2 years with the carbon pricing version 1, end of 2024, beginning of 2025. And now end of 2025, we have even the version 2 that went even deeper. Also based on the criticism and feedback that we received on version 1 of the procurement of the carbon pricing principles. And this is really the spirit of SPP. Let's get started. Let's improve. It's a journey.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you. Very interesting. And I mean, I think this is what you always do, right? You do not only crowdsource solutions, but also the problems, I guess. So
Yeah,
very nice.
yeah, and I think what is also important is to say it's not the SPP global team. I mean, we are three people, right? We are not there to come up with the solutions and answers. It's really bringing procurement people together to talk to each other, to benefit from each other, to, really exchange into the nitty-gritty relevant procurement conversations. And we are there to open up the space for these conversations to happen.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. And Jaymin, I mean, maybe over to you because Kathrin said that they are providing the space, but Bayer was actually with Halion together one of the first ones to take it. So one of the champions, particularly then also in this initiative on carbon pricing. Maybe could you allude a little bit on what were the business imperatives for Bayer, to jump on this train, take on the front runner role and actually move really then also carbon from a reporting metric into a decision factor in procurement? Because from what I also read in the case study, you've already piloted it now also across multiple tenders. So how come that you wanted to be one of the first ones there?
Yeah. I think so for us, one of the key challenge when we started with our decarbonization program was how can we go away from just doing a calculation, just a number crunching exercise, and move more towards action. And that action is influencing how procurement takes decisions today. And we try to do a lot of different things over a course of years. And then as the maturity of data and how as TFS standards that we use as well, for example, for PCF calculation, those things materialized over the course of years, we realized, oh, now we are getting into a territory where we could include something like a carbon price, which is not a new concept in theory. I mean, if you hear CBAM and other things, this is exactly where carbon pricing is going to hit. Probably many of us in the industry and some of us have already been getting impacted by that. Um, so we wanted to be a bit more prepared for that. And having that in mind, I think it was already in 2022, 23, we started testing a few concepts, how carbon pricing could look like. And this is where we started realizing there's so many ways of doing something.
Mm,
Um, and there is a need to also exchange a little bit with our peers in the industry, what they feel would be a good way of driving something like this. And this is where we came across and collaborated with SPP and Halion, and then that evolved into a concept that Kathrin mentioned, so version 1 and 2. But at the same time, we also found our own footing navigating through different options of how carbon pricing could look like, and come to a reasonable approach that we were feeling more comfortable to explore in our sourcing events. And at the end of the day, this was the main driver. So how we in and at the and every sourcing that we do today has an implication for next 3 to 5 years, considering that
mm,
when you do a contract, you are looking at these 3 to 5 years horizon. And we wanted to do a conscious decision, take a conscious decision early on. So that was the main driver that got us a little bit more on the front end, front runner sort of thinking. Not sure if we are having the best solution at hand. I think that's not what we are also claiming, but at least we want to continue exploring and expanding on our learnings over the course of the year. And I think now we have a very robust approach with the version 2 principles that SPP has laid down together with the community who contributed to come to prepare this
mm.
nice documentation.
Yeah, thank you. And Jaymin, I mean, what you just mentioned, right, that you might not have the perfect approach. I guess this is also what was highlighted in the carbon pricing case study that you sent to me before the webinar, and that we will also be sharing with the audience, of course. That also says about, piloting, training, collecting feedback, and then also iterating on the way. And I think this is exactly also what we want to look at today. So we don't want to scare anybody here with the perfect solution in place, but rather to showcase some examples of how carbon pricing could actually be implemented. And that being said, we would of course also be interested to just quickly find out a little bit more about the audience today here on the call. So we have prepared a little survey for you, which is highlighting which function you're actually coming from. So we have a little bit of your business background, but then also we want to look and ask you to what extent actually carbon is already a real decision criteria in your procurement today. Then the third question is, where does your organization currently stand on carbon pricing? Is it something you don't consider at all yet? Are you exploring it, running first pilots, or are you in the implementation phase already, or are you actually already scaling it up? And in case you're already working on carbon pricing or not, what is currently the biggest barrier to applying it? So please select. It's all anonymous, so you don't have to fear anything in there comes out. But would lovely to just get your responses in. So got a little bit more time. I see that about half of the people have answered the poll already. So for the others, please also just click on it. All right. Izzy, could you maybe just share the results also on the screen in case not everybody sees it? If not, I will just walk you over them. Maybe you also see it on your screen. But actually, 75% of the participants today are from the sustainability, ESG, or climate strategy teams, and then we have 25% from procurement, and some others then also from finance. And when we look at carbon already being a decision criteria in procurement, there's actually 45% that say that sometimes at least it is already decision relevant, and 14% even say that it is consistently integrated in decisions. So we definitely see by having a 60% that already considered that carbon is not just a reporting metric anymore, but that it becomes more and more than also business decision relevant, which I find very nice to see. I wonder how this survey would have turned out a year ago and how it might be a year from now. But then also question number 3. So where do your organization currently stand on carbon pricing? Well, here we have a 60% that are already discussing it internally. 18% are running pilots and 4% are already scaling it up. And then the biggest barrier to applying carbon pricing actually comes from internal alignment, followed then by the fear of cost impact. I'm very sure that this is also something that we will be talking about today, and the lack of reliable and comparable data or supplier readiness. So I guess Kathrin, this is something that or results that you're working with a lot also to shape your strategy for the carbon pricing principles. But that being said, I would actually like to now hand it over to you to guide us through the content and the beautiful work of what you're doing.
Thank you very much. So let me quickly pull up some slides for you.
And while you're pulling up the slides, please, everybody, notice that also we have a Q&A function. So you have it down in the bar where it says questions and answers. You can just open it up and pull in your questions either anonymously or with your name, and then we will either look at them during the conversation or afterwards. Now over to you. I'm sorry.
No, thank you very much. All right, let me give you a quick run through what we are talking about when I speak about the SPP carbon pricing initiative and the results, now version 2 of the carbon pricing principles. So as Jaymin already said, carbon pricing itself isn't a new topic, but carbon pricing for procurement was a really exciting frontier our community has been exploring in the last 2 years. So as I said earlier, it began all with Haleon and Bayer really asking a simple but powerful question. Could carbon pricing help accelerate decarbonization through procurement? And if so, could we create shared principles to build momentum? And SPP created a space, a safe space for this question to turn into a cross-industry initiative, a neutral space, a neutral environment where companies, community members of SPP, and ecosystem partners can co-develop solutions that not only benefit one organization, but actually can scale beyond one organization. So our carbon pricing for procurement initiative was launched in early 2024 and was our first pilot of an initiative. And the goal, you can see that here on the screen, was to develop a methodology or principles that embed carbon pricing directly into commercial evaluation criteria for tenders and supplier selection and also to incentivize suppliers to baseline and reduce their carbon emissions. So phase 1 in 2024 was really about bringing a community together. And we did that in very close collaboration with the Scope 3 peer group. And it was focusing on awareness raising around this topic, so really putting it on the agenda, and best practice sharing. So really convene a peer group of sustainability and procurement professional, capture the existing experiences, and to collaboratively draft the first version of the carbon pricing principles that were launched in January 2025. And over 200 industry leaders were involved in this first phase. And as I said before, it was not about getting it perfect, but really putting the topic on the agenda, compiling the existing experience, and getting it started. Phase 2 then, in 2025, was really about the piloting of these principles and getting a feedback loop into refining those existing carbon pricing principles. And in this phase, we were supported by the wonderful Xavier Wood from Bain and Company, who really helped us facilitate those conversations and to extract the insights to edit the version, the carbon pricing principles. And we had, I think, over 110 procurement professionals involved in this phase, representing over 70 companies. And these were companies who were either already actively piloting carbon pricing to share their experiences, or were, as many here today, very interested in this topic, already having some conversation internally in the organization, or companies who were just starting on this topic. So it was a really nice, interesting groups with also very interesting, obviously, conversations based on this different maturity levels on carbon pricing involved in this pilot group. And we had obviously Bayer very much involved, very strongly involved. Haleon, Chris from Haleon, a very strong driver. Also Novonesis, Tetra Pak, just to name a few companies who were involved in this pilot group. So you can see here already on the slide a QR code. If you want direct access to the carbon pricing principles version 2, that would be your QR code. So why carbon pricing? Carbon pricing obviously is a very powerful decarbonization tool. It makes carbon measurable, comparable, and decision relevant. So carbon pricing really converts emissions into a common procurement language. And by translating a carbon into monetary value, carbon becomes something procurement teams and supplier can actually compare directly alongside price and performance. And this shifts carbon from a theoretical sustainability metric into actually a real decision driver. It also turns climate ambition into financial incentives. So carbon pricing puts money behind decarbonization commitments. It's walking the talk. Suppliers with a lower product carbon footprint, PCF, are financially rewarded. This indirectly, obviously, incentivizes real actions such as switching to renewable energy, improving energy efficiency, or optimizing materials and processes. And it rewards real decarbonization, not just labels. So a lower PCF reflects concrete climate action, not just claims. Carbon pricing reinforces credibility by ensuring emissions reductions lead to tangible commercial benefits in tenders. And it accelerates high quality Scope 3 data, one of the key obstacles of decarbonization. So Scope 3 emission data is one of the biggest decarbonization challenges. Carbon pricing creates a strong incentive for suppliers to move from industry average to supplier-specific PCFs. So over time, and this is a journey, this improves data accuracy, transparency, decision quality. It also creates a fairness and a clear transition path for suppliers, because if suppliers cannot yet provide a PCF, something like an industry average would be used and a penalty would be applied to keep it fair, but also clearly signaling that transparency is expected and suppliers will be rewarded once they start sharing real data and robust data. It also boosts internal and external carbon literacy. So making carbon part of tender decisions dramatically increases internal engagement across procurement, finance, and sustainability, and meaningful discussions with suppliers. So carbon concepts like PCF and Scope 3 move from a theory to a practically application. And last but not least, it really embeds carbon into the core business decisions. For decarbonization to succeed at scale, carbon must be considered in every critical business decision. So that is the why. That was really the rationale behind starting this conversation, but also behind the principles. So maybe very quickly, what is carbon pricing? I saw many already familiar with the concept. So let me maybe just quickly touch upon that. So what is carbon pricing in procurement? Carbon pricing in procurement is a method used to factor carbon emissions into purchasing decisions alongside financial costs. It assigns a monetary value to the carbon emissions associated with a product or service, making climate impact visible and comparable during supplier selection. So the basic mechanism is in tenders, companies will request carbon footprint data associated with each offer, using product carbon footprints or service carbon footprints. The commercial evaluation will then be based on the supplier's financial price plus the carbon costs associated with the offer. You can see the nice equation here on the slide. So how are we handle cases where carbon data is not available or not comparable? So if a supplier cannot provide a PCF, an industry average emission factor will then be used instead and a penalty uplift added. So in the carbon pricing principles, there's a suggestion of adding 50%, but also this very much depends on companies, categories, etc. So, and now to the carbon pricing principles. What can you expect if you open this document? So it is designed as a short, practical 10-page guide, very hands-on, very accessible for procurement teams. It is structured around 4 chapters. So the first chapter starts with the business case. How to convince CPOs, CFOs, sustainability and procurement teams and the business on starting the carbon pricing journey. It addresses the why carbon pricing makes business sense. The second chapter goes more into the mechanics, the methodology, the mathematics behind carbon pricing, on how to quantify carbon, what carbon price to use, might be the EU ETS or internal reference prices, and how to start simply with metrics to start simple, as Jaymin already said, maybe start a piloting, also which metrics to apply and how to engage suppliers on the data. And the next 2 chapters are actually exactly looking deeper into the engagement. First, the internal engagement with your procurement teams, because carbon pricing is a change management process. It turns principles into daily procurement decisions and embedding carbon pricing really into category and sourcing processes. And then the engagement with the suppliers. It is creating transparency, incentives, and also collaboration. So the relationship to the suppliers is influenced by carbon pricing. and supporting suppliers on the transition rather than just imposing those requirements. So it's a journey, it's a conversation, it's a relationship that you build with your suppliers around carbon pricing. And these wonderful carbon pricing principles available for free on our SPP website are complemented by 2 case studies. One from Bayer and also one from Halion. So if you really want to get deeper and see how companies are actually doing it, which approaches are they using, where have they made decisions, go into those carbon pricing case studies. And obviously, we would like to hear more. So if you're currently implementing, piloting carbon pricing, share your insights, your journey with our community.
Yeah.
So,
And Kathrin, maybe
yes.
one question, if you go back to the slide that you just showed. I mean, you have these chapters also for a reason, right? That this is,
Yes.
how you guide people through it. And when you talk about carbon pricing, right, I think, I mean, it is often described and also considered, I believe, as the logical next step, but then adoption is yet still limited. So, why isn't everybody doing it already? And why did you come up with these chapters? So, because there was a question here also on the
Mhm.
chat where the gap comes from between logic and reality. So, is it that internal carbon pricing is primarily a technical challenge or a data challenge, or is the bigger hurdle to adoption maybe also coming from change management, basically, that would be required to shift procurement and business mindsets from traditional sourcing priorities? Where do you now see the biggest hurdle to adoption?
So these carbon pricing principles and the chapters were actually developed to respond to exactly those questions. Carbon pricing sounds great in theory, but if you're talking about implementation, here are my problems. And actually, they are as diverse as companies are diverse. Depending on which industry you're working on, which category you want to look at, also how your internal organization is structured. It really depends on where the blockers are. And also where potentials are to unblock, those hurdles. So these chapters really try to respond to those. What we have seen, in particular in the evolution of the carbon pricing principles, is that the business case became more and more a demand. How can I really show that carbon pricing makes business sense? So here that was really clear, and it also became very clear in terms of blockers. If the conversation internally in the procurement team, but also internally in the organization, is blocked, it will not go forward. So it kind of nicely reflects the poll results that we saw here in the session in terms of what are the key blockers and costs. Obviously, one of the big criteria for procurement is also so the understanding of what will it cost us. Because, there's one interesting comment that we heard in our pilot group meeting was like, I'm have the green light to do anything around sustainability if it doesn't cost our organization anything.
Mhm.
So, and with that, I think that is actually what we want to do next is we had last week at our World Sustainable Procurement Day also a session focused on carbon pricing, and rather with 3 wonderful speakers in there, which I will introduce you in a second. And what we did is we did a little role play to exactly air those questions, those blockers that we heard throughout the process, and to showcase rather than one slide after the next about the carbon pricing principles, to really showcase in a conversation between a CFO, a CPO, and a CSO, how can and how should a conversation about carbon pricing look like? Always with obviously knowing that it can look very differently in very different organizations, but still we try to make sure that we bring at least the basic principles into the conversation to start the conversation, and to give a bit of a guidance on how engagement with carbon pricing could look like and requires if you want to start this.
And Kathrin, just looking at the time, and because there's more and
Yeah.
more questions coming in that I actually find very interesting too, and but I don't want to ask them yet. So Wolfram, Stefan, I
Yes.
see your questions, but I would like to get Jaymin on stage first, so Kathrin and Jaymin can answer them together after you've seen the practical example by Bayer. Would you be okay with maybe us sharing the video later in like after the webinar, so that we have more time for discussion between you and Jaymin to answer the direct questions from the chat? Would that be okay?
It would be okay. Although I mean, I'm coming in here, as not a
Yeah,
procurement professional, right? So I can obviously share what I heard in conversations.
yeah.
I think and maybe we just play half of it, right? I think this role play that we did last week is actually potentially already answering a number of those questions, that came up in the Q&A. So if we could at least, play a few of those minutes of the role play, I think that would give a great overview of you know, how to approach carbon pricing and how the discussion look like. For example, does it cost us? Yeah, and
Hmm.
what does it cost us? And what does it mean in terms of supplier maturity? What does it mean in terms of engagement with the CFO, who very closely looks obviously at the cost for the organization. So if you could, I would love to have at least, the first few minutes to share with the audience.
Yeah, for sure. Then let's play maybe the first 5 minutes. I mean, there was also a very interesting calculation example in there. And then we will be sharing the rest so people get the appetite, because I would like to get, yeah, I'll have some time also for discussion, because also, yeah, Jamie needs to leave on time for family
Yes.
duties. All right, then
Okay.
easy, I think video time. Let's go for it, if you will.
Let's just remind us about, why this topic came up and why are we exploring carbon pricing. As you know, our CEO and our company has committed to the Science-Based Target Initiative. And also in the last board meeting, climate was top on the agenda, not from an ESG perspective alone, right? From a productivity and also profitability perspective. So, but when we talk about decarbonization, let us not forget the elephant in the room, procurement. More than 80% of our emissions are sitting in procurement, and we cannot decarbonize without looking at, how can we reduce the emissions from our suppliers, and also thinking the carbon into each of our procurement decision making on how our spend is going to impact our carbon emissions and our decarbonization journey.
No doubt, you're right. And the CEO really presented in the AGM our carbon commitment, no doubt. But you remember, I also presented our cash recovery ambition, which are very ambitious. Our gross margin, has to improve, as I recollect, as I reminded it earlier. And we have dividend ambitions to reward the shareholders, as you know as well, Shruti. So again, I'm afraid we'll have to make those hard choices. We can't necessarily carry all of these ambitions at once, Shruti.
Yeah, it's actually exactly the same on my end. We even failed to meet our productivity savings goal last year. We only got 3%. So we really just can't afford anything that's going to add cost to our process.
Yeah, I hear you both, right? And let's just not jump into conclusions. Let's take a step back here and let me explain, what are we trying to do here? So what we are basically trying to do with the carbon pricing is that for the tenders, along with the commercial code, we will ask our suppliers for their carbon footprint. We calculate their carbon footprint using the PCS they share with us, and then put a shadow price on top of the base price. So I think we should really start seeing this more like a mechanism where we can visualize the impact of our procurement decision on our carbon intensity and our decarbonization journey. I think by doing this mechanism, we will be actually able to visualize what will be the trade-offs between the commercial and the carbon impact while taking procurement decisions. And of course, the cost is key here, right? We need to look at it, but maybe let's start looking at some numbers here. Maybe, Chris, you can help me here. Let's assume our scope 3 for the year is 500,000 tons CO2 emissions. And if we had to decarbonize that whole using an EU ETS, how do you think that would impact our procurement spend?
Yeah, okay. Let's get the calculator out and work out these numbers. So you're right. So our carbon footprint is 500,000 tons. And then the EU ETS, I think it's 72 today, but it's been around 80 for the last few months. So let's use 80. So that takes it to 40 million euros as a potential on cost. Now we're spending about 2 billion as a company in procurement. So we're never going to do this in 1 year, but even if we did, that's about 2% of our annual spend.
Yeah, and some of our levers are not that expensive, though.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, of course, like things like renewable electricity, much cheaper, like 5 euros, up to 20 euros. Okay, so let's take an average. Let's say half of the things are gonna, well, let's say the average is half of that. So that would take us to 1%, right?
Yeah, but some of the levers are much more expensive than the EU ETS as well. So it will vary very much.
Yeah,
I think what we would see is some are above and some are below, kind of, right, Chris?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you're right. There are some levers that are really expensive, that we're never going to be incentivizing with carbon pricing. So again, probably half of the things that we need to address are below the 80, and maybe half of them are above the 80. So again, we could probably halve it again. So that takes us from the 1 to about 0.5%.
But this is assuming we are doing this in 1 year.
Oh, yeah. You're right. So, well, how many years should we assume it over? What do you think? Maybe 10 years? So, if it was over 10 years, then that would take that 0.5% down to 0.05%. So yeah, okay. I guess when you work it out like that, it's not such an inflation.
Yeah, I like this perspective.
Right?
Yeah, where we look at
maybe we can stop here.
Yes, I was about
I
to
think.
say.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I mean, Kathrin, as I was saying, right, we will be sharing the video thereafter. And I actually found it also very interesting because a lot of the question, as you're saying, for example, when you look at this like fear gap, right, of the fear of the perceived cost, right, that is up to come, that actually isn't like this if you then also calculate it through. And many other things also when it comes to PCF validation, for example, will be addressed in the video. But also, I'm very sure that the use case of Jaymin from Bayer can actually give some answers. And Jaymin, as you go and as I see your slides, I would actually like to ask the questions also from the chat because they were like spot on towards the challenges that you also mentioned when having the discussions to implement carbon pricing in Bayer.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think and very interesting conversation, role play exercise. Really loved it. And I saw the questions in the chat. I will also try to cater a little bit of my updates presentation to those needs. So as I was saying, so Bayer has been using carbon pricing, but also with an intention that we want to influence sourcing events that we have. And we knew that sourcing events doesn't always need to be influenced just by carbon pricing. We also have other qualitative aspects that helps us. So maybe I go to that real quick. So typically how we look into this is we try to influence the sourcing events in 2 parts. One part is, like I said, the qualitative aspect, understanding how the suppliers who are participating in the sourcing events, how they can be categorized on their decarbonization journey, which helps us to consciously understand whether they are on the right path, are they aligning with our ambitions and our targets, or we might be facing an uphill battle there. So that's something we want to make more transparent. So that's part 1. And then part 2 is wherever we have the opportunity to get PCFs, see if this can be an option to explore. So run these calculations jointly with the sourcing team who is going to be leading the final sourcing decision-making process. If you go to the next slide, this is just a quick preview or a snapshot on what we do with our qualitative part, like I said. So typically in our sourcing exercise, we ask suppliers also to provide some information on where do they stand with these basic elements on decarbonization. So are they able to report those emissions? Can they share how their renewable electricity usage in their business is evolving? Some information on sustainability reports. Also, do they have capability already established to provide product carbon footprints? So is it available now or maybe for future? This can help us engaging how advanced, how mature they are on our bare defined maturity model. So we say some suppliers are not advanced versus some suppliers who are advanced on their journey. And our ambition would be to, of course, do more and more business with the ones who are advanced, so doing the right things, and see if we have to still do a business with someone who is not advanced, how can we help them to move towards the advanced side? So that's the qualitative part that we bring. And this is brought mainly to the sourcing managers so that they know, they consciously take a decision, knowing what are the implications of this. Because we also have a procurement internal KPI defined around it, meaning we want to move more and more of our spend towards advanced suppliers. So if they consciously decide that we want to move away the spend towards not advanced because of many reasons. I think there could be many reasons like um, reliability or history with the certain supplier. Um, Single sourcing is also another challenge that we might be running into. Capability or very specific materials. So those kind of challenges come into the mix as well. And that's where we say, okay, we might have to do that, but we have a KPI that we all want to influence. Hence, we might have to work with those suppliers who are not advanced over a period of time to get them towards that advanced journey. And one of the key element of this advanced supplier is PCFs. So we want to incentivize suppliers who are going to be giving us PCF. So let's say we decide to move with an advanced supplier, that's great, because then they are able to give us PCFs, they are on the right journey. But if they are not able to give PCFs, then and if we still have to do business with them, if they are not advanced, we will encourage them, we will support them. That and also sometimes in contractual terms as well, we try to include very specific clauses. How can we, collaborate further to get PCFs in a shorter period of time? So not wait until 3 years of contract term. And get this as soon as possible. So that's also another lever to use. So not always waiting for a PCF, but also bringing this already upfront in the sourcing decision, and then see how we can influence this in the future. But that's part one. If we go to the second part, which is the carbon pricing part, and before we go there, I think you can go to the next slide, Kathrin. So before we go into the actual calculation, we were also having this big challenge in the beginning. A lot of sourcing decisions are happening day to day. I mean, we are a global company. We have a 25 billion euro spend happening every year. So we can't be there for every single sourcing decision. That's not what, and that's also not what we are aiming for. And we said, let's start with some sort of a filtering out. And I think it's very simple. So whenever you have quantity-based sourcing decisions, so products, materials, units, pieces, kilograms, liters, this is where you want to explore carbon pricing. And then we said whether we work with spend or do we work with CO2. So what is the criteria that will help us in defining whether we want to, let's say, definitely do a carbon pricing here or explore a carbon pricing here, or it is optional and really to the interest of the procurement sourcing team, whether and whether this is of interest for them, they have capacity and they can collaborate with us in embedding something like this. And we defined a threshold. Still, we are learning whether this is a good or a bad threshold, but this is where we started with. And as you see, if we know that we are going to be making a big sourcing decision to purchase chemical A or packaging material B, Then we first look into how much was the CO2 emissions historically for those materials and how much are we expecting for future. Is it going to be growing or it's going to stay flat? And then roughly get a very first indication, this is going to be above our threshold. And then this is something where we can potentially get involved and collaborate with our sourcing managers to bring the transparency on how carbon pricing can be a good insight that can additionally help them in taking decision. And on the next step, we basically this is just a simple mechanism. So on the next chart, how we do this, nothing special. I think even SPP principles, if you look into that document, they have a nice template as well. So what sort of data points you want to collect from the suppliers. We started with something very simple, but we ask a few data points which are quantity information, so the actual CO2 emission in inputs, but then also do a quality check. Again, this is more trust-based, meaning suppliers are giving good information, rightful information, just like spend. I mean, if you think of it, if they quote a number for spend or a value, you have to trust that this is the number that you will use in your future planning. You can't expect suddenly supplier giving another claim. So it's more of a trust element, definitely not always very verified. So that also answers one of the question that I wanted to bring up. So we cannot definitely spend a lot of time in verifying different numbers that we are getting in those templates. Uh, Nevertheless, we do a bit of a cross-checking, meaning if we are having 5 suppliers in a sourcing event, and if you are getting numbers like 1, 2, and then suddenly 10, then this is something that might be alarming. And this is where you can definitely do a first quality check. Again, not thorough check whether they have equal level of emission factors being used, whether the data quality rating is consistent. So those technicalities might be a bit of a far-fetch for now. I think we are also finding a way how we can use something like that in future, how we can integrate things more in an automated manner. But this is something for future. I think we are not yet there. So for the time being, it's more of a qualitative assessment on how suppliers did those calculations for PCF, uh, with some indicators on what is the scope of the PCF, so cradle to gate versus cradle to grave or gate to gate. So they give those sort of indications. We also convey what sort of units we are interested in. And sometimes we also had the opportunity to do a bit of a back and forth with some suppliers. So we clarify, hey, this is 10, seems a little bit odd. Can you clarify this? And then we get good reasons out of it. And then we ask suppliers to also recalibrate their calculation. So again, it's a small pragmatic pathway that we have picked. Not the ideal one, not the best one, definitely. One can also question how big the deviation would be, but this is the best we work with for the time being. Now, if I go to the next chart, this is sort of how, and it's something Kathrin already explained. Maybe I allude to one of the questions that was raised in the chat. So how are we willing to pay for a premium? So meaning the actual cost might be higher for a certain material from a supplier. But then if you add carbon price on top, this might look a little bit lower. So in fact, it is a higher cash out for you. So that's an interesting question. And if I'm being very honest, decarbonization is not the only criteria that we use in our sourcing decision. So, and if I'm being even more brutally honest, out of the 15 or 16 events that we have looked into, I think there were not too many instances where carbon pricing was significantly swinging the decision. So this is probably one of the learnings that we are also having. EU ETS is helpful, definitely, as a pricing. But at the same time, EU ETS being so small right now, it's 70 euro per ton. and then the pricing effect across different suppliers. As you can see on this chart, there is supplier 3 as well, which is, again, we had to generalize and anonymize the information. But in this particular event, we had a supplier who was giving very low pricing quote. And now you can't, even if with a carbon price and maybe even a poorer or a better CO2, you can't just go with that. I mean, you can't beat, even if this supplier had 9, the worst PCF possible. Um, so in that case, we look into multiple factors, and at the end of the day, it is up to sourcing managers to see what is the best option. Um, and there are other criterias like reliability, resilience, delivery, and many other things. Also, history with a certain supplier, how we have been doing business with them. So those factors do play a role. Um, and hence it's a mix of those things. There was another question on, are you willing to pay green premium? I think if I'm being very honest on that one as well, um, so the answer for that is depends. First, when I say depends, we are starting to go a little bit away from always talking about green premium. But if you look at our geopolitical challenges that we are facing and many other aspects that we are managing right now as businesses, we try to see whether what we try to do with decarbonization fits into that narrative as well. I mean, look at the situation that we are having with the war right now in Middle East. This has seen a significant spike in energy costs in many parts of the world, and subsequently raw material costs. So I think this is where the business case for decarbonization becomes more stronger. So the companies who have already moved to renewables and so on, they might be not seeing such fluctuations as critical compared to some of the others, be it energy prices or so on. So this is where I think we try to position it less as a premium, but see how this can also help in some cases with building resilience. Um, and second, someone also asked whether the customers are willing to pay for those. I think we at Bayer are not having this direct pull from our customer. I mean, if I'm being honest, we have a business which is agriculture sector, so farmers using our chemicals and seeds. And then there is another business which is pharmaceuticals, which is for patients who are using those products. We have a division on consumer health, which is similar to Halion, where there might be a potential where customers might be willing to pay, but again, that's not huge. So this pull from the downstream is not that high, which results in asking ourselves a real question: can we really afford paying premium? Um, and this is where I think we try to position this in a slightly different narrative, wherever we can build more resilience in the system, wherever we can prepare our business for uh, challenges such as what we are facing right now around geopolitics or so on. This is where we try to position carbon pricing as a tool to give more visibility, um, but at the same time also think how we can influence those decisions further. I know there are many questions in the chat and in the Q&A, and I think I just wanted to highlight two things real quick. So first, we use carbon pricing not just because we think it's just a tool to take the decision, but it's also important that and I think Kathrin very nicely explained that in the beginning, why behind it. And for us, one of the strongest why is the data push. So with this, we are making sure that supplier understands we are very serious about product carbon footprints. We want those data points. We want them to be included in our future accounting. And also we want them to be the best, because then you build a little bit of a competition in your supplier network. So that is the main element. Given the challenges that we will be facing, comparability and verification. It's going to be a bit of a challenge if you have to do such things in a short period of time. Typically, these sourcing events will last from 2 to 3 months, where you ask suppliers tons of data on the spend side, but also on the CO2 side. So it's always fast paced, and looking at the magnitude of events that happen, it's also very challenging. So we want to keep that away in mind. So, and this results a little bit more on managing our effort and complexity. So, but we are hopeful with the advancement of AI solutions and stuff. Maybe there are certain tools or solutions that we can explore in the future that can help us in getting better with this comparability and verification much faster than the amount of resources that we have to pour in today. But yeah, this is where we stand as Bayer. I think we have started with this. We know not always we will be comparing apples to apples, but this is a risk that we are willing to take. Again, and at the end of the day, as I said, this is not the only criteria that defines a sourcing decision. It's just an indication. We want people to have a transparency that carbon can be influenced through these sourcing decisions, and there is a way to quantify this influence.
Thank you, Jaymin. This was very, very interesting. I think what you've also been showing is that also this topic of carbon pricing, in the end, it's a loop, right? It's a feedback loop. So you can only have better calculations with better data. Data gets only better if more people request it. If there is like really this market shift then also happening. So yeah, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, I guess, if more and more people then also walk the talk of carbon pricing. And I mean, there's, yeah, as you said, more questions even in the chat. And I think it's a very, very interesting topic also to talk about. I know that you need to leave, but Jaymin, maybe just to like finish with one question, right? So if a company would like to move now from 0 to 1 with carbon pricing also in the next, let's say 6 months, right? What is the single most important building block that they need to have in place?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, but let me try to simplify by saying, start with something simple. I think the principles are laid down. Pick a pilot, identify one of the next sourcing decision that might be happening, and then build such scenarios, calculations, and make it visible to the audience, to the community. I think theoretical explanations are always nice, but when you give such data, give some proof points, people try to understand, and then this conversation itself will trigger more ideas and thoughts in the community. And maybe the principles can be applied like one-on-one for you, for your business from SPP. Maybe you need a variation for that, but this is something you will realize when you start trying. So I would urge, pick one sourcing event that you see in next 3 to 6 months coming in your procurement organization. Talk to those procurement experts. Hey, there's a cool concept in the world. SPP has put together some nice principles. We want to explore this. We want to try them with you. And I think this is where it can become very interesting. Don't wait for the experts to come there. Don't wait for fancy calculators to run. I think it's important you start doing with some simple steps, and then you will also realize where the pitfalls are. You will also realize where you need to be a bit more conscious for your particular business. And I think this is what I would recommend everyone to get going.
Yeah, thank you. And Kathrin, I mean, you have the like cross-company perspective also in here. Maybe you can, just share a quick thought, because I think there's also a lot of like misconceptions that are also like looked upon in the video that we will be sharing afterwards in the conversation. So, what is your favorite, so to say, misperception that we should decode today for the audience, so that they are not afraid by it and don't start carbon pricing because of that?
I think the misconception is that you have to do it alone, right? That you really have to come up with something, from scratch. And to be honest, I think the video, also the conversation today, is less about misconceptions, but serious concerns, right? On how to implement this very practically into my procurement decision making. And these are all very valid. And you're not the first person who asked this question. So what I would say is reach out to your peers who have already some experience with it. Join the pilot group of carbon pricing where you have peers already engaged in that, and ask those questions and hear the responses. And as Jaymin really nicely said, is there is not the one answer. There is multiple experiences where people really try to translate this concept of carbon pricing in their very practical procurement processes, and fail. And out of this failing, they learn and they adjust. Some companies, decided after a pilot, we're not going forward with it, but the whole process alone already changed conversations within companies, changed conversations with suppliers. So even that is a value creation. So I think it is, as Jaymin nicely said, don't be too theoretical about it. Get into it, start small. Little, one tender, a little pilot, in your company, and learn from those experiences, and then make a decision whether it works for you. Because, as I said at the beginning, carbon pricing is one tool in the decarbonization toolbox, and you need to find out whether that's the right one for you or not.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, we are already a little bit over time, but I see that there's still some people here. So, Izzy, I would actually love for you to just bring up very quickly also some slides on the next, engagement events that we will be having, because if you all liked the conversation that we had today during the webinar, well, then it doesn't have to be the last point in time that you're getting in touch with leaders that are tackling exactly these questions. And because there's Climate Transformation Summit coming up. So it's happening on the 10th and 11th of June here in Berlin. Jaymin was also a part of the conversation last year. And this year there will actually be his colleague whom I also saw on the call. So Tim Vollbrecht, he's leading the supplier engagement around Scope 3. And we will be then also having several sessions around supplier decarbonization programs. And it's very interesting, the perspective also that Tim brings in, because they have actually a very a scaled up approach already, a very good structure for it on how they segment and prioritize suppliers, which levers are used to drive decarbonization, how progress is tracked, and much more. So he will be there to share his insights, and I guess is always up for a chat. Sorry, Tim. I don't want to put too much pressure on you, but this is what I would think of you then also joining the summit. And you can also, of course, also meet the Sustainable Procurement Pledge team. So including Kathrin and Melissa, bringing in the next step of this conversation. So really looking again at the why to do carbon pricing, what carbon pricing means in terms of supplier dialogue and incentives and much more, and how to get started or scale up, even if you have limited resources, right? Even if you're not a multinational, how can you get this done? So if the question today is not just what is carbon pricing, but really how to make this work in practice, well, then I would all like to invite you to come and join us at CTS 2026. You can find more information also on the webpage, and you can also just write me a mail to josepha@theclimatechoice.com in case you have any questions. And if this is not enough, then Kathrin, we also agreed that you would like to share some resources again from SPP that are downloadable just right now.
Yes, let me quickly pull this up to make sure we go. So very quickly, as I said, carbon pricing principles available for everyone to download for free. Here is the QR code for you with the direct access. If you want a bit more information about the initiative itself and also have access to these wonderful case studies that I mentioned, come to our website, look at the carbon pricing initiatives. This gives a really nice overview, who is involved, what the process was, plus the resource section with the case studies, the principles, but also videos for you to look into. And as I said, the session from last week on carbon pricing will be included there too. So you can see the full role play, which is, I think, around 20 minutes. So a lot of those hurdles will be discussed. And an invitation to you. Join the carbon pricing initiative, join the group of peers engaging on this and sharing their experiences. Here's the QR code to an online form where you can sign up. And also, as an inspiration, if you think there is a gap, there is a challenge, an opportunity that not only is interesting for your organization to look into, but actually would benefit from procurement-wide collaboration, then put your ideas also in this form. We are looking for the next SPP initiative to fill the gap that is really helping procurement to accelerate sustainability in global supply chains. So really looking forward to hear where you see great opportunities to activate the procurement community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you really to the two of you for bringing your two perspectives here together on this topic that I believe is becoming more and more important. So I think it's really, I like it to see, that there's so much questions on it, because it also really shows that, it's not only about reporting anymore, right? We want to also make carbon then part of decision criteria, but also considering, of course, other important factors such as cost availability, what Jaymin was mentioning, right? So it's not about overwriting something. That being said, thank you everybody also for joining. I'm sorry for taking a little bit longer, but I think it just shows the interest. And I hope to see you all at Climate Transformation Summit then in June. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josepha. See you there.
Have a nice day. Bye.